So you've been told you have to read off a teleprompter. What do? The first thing you do is know your enemy. Stay tuned. Next on Moxie Talk, we are going to break down everything you need to know about reading off a teleprompter. Hi everyone, I'm Thea Fastbinder and welcome to Moxie Talk, where we help you find your voice, share your message, and lead with confidence. Last time we talked about tips and techniques to read from a teleprompter. This time we are talking about the different kinds of teleprompters. And this is a two-part series on teleprompters, which is part of a bigger series on media training. Now, let's start with where teleprompters came from. Once upon a time, folks in front of cameras had to read cue cards, and they were these giant cards that somebody would hold up to help them know their thoughts and know their ideas so that they didn't have to memorize it all. Now, you might have seen this in some old movies or some old footage. That was eventually replaced by scrolling paper that had the script printed on it, and it would be mounted on the camera or below the camera, so it would roll as the person was reading. And the technician would roll this paper as the person in front of the camera was reading. And this whole thing was eventually automated, like most other technology, so that we came up with modern day teleprompters. The only problem is that we need to make sure when we're reading off a teleprompter that it looks like we're looking into the camera. So then they made teleprompters that had a camera behind it or a lens behind it, and then the teleprompter in front of it, so that it looked like the speaker was looking directly into the eyes of the viewer when really they were looking directly at the teleprompter. So this is a little bit about the evolution of teleprompters. So you might be wondering how teleprompters work. Well, teleprompters have evolved even since they've had glass. But the original glass teleprompters had a prompt that was mounted below the camera and a sheet of glass that would reflect the image of the script to the reader. And this meant that the script had to be printed backwards for it to appear correctly. The camera sat behind the glass and saw only the speaker who was finally looking directly into the lens. And this is a core mechanic of how teleprompters work even today. But they have evolved, so now we do not have to print scripts backwards. There are all sorts of teleprompter apps that can read your script, even if it's printed in the way it's meant to be printed. And I have never heard of a speaker who still has to print their speeches backwards. So that's a huge evolution in teleprompters. But we still use this glass feature where your words are reflected above. You might be asked to read from many different kinds of teleprompters. There's 3 different kinds out there that I want to break down and unpack for you a little bit so that you feel confident in whichever one you're asked to read off of. The first kind of teleprompter and the most common kind of teleprompter is what we call a camera-mounted teleprompter. And these are very similar to the original ones that reflected with glass, but they've become smaller, they've become thinner, they've become lighter, like most of our technology that's in popular use today. But odds are that this is the kind of teleprompter you'll have to use if you're speaking in front of a camera. And if you're speaking or delivering an outgoing company message or a training video, this is typically the kind of teleprompter that you'll practice on and that you'll use. Now, there isn't a one-size-fits-all teleprompter for the camera-mounted teleprompters. The camera and the teleprompter have to go together, but this doesn't mean that the technology changes drastically. So if you know how to read off one of these camera-mounted teleprompters, you know how to read off all of them. The only difference is sometimes the camera will be mounted externally above the teleprompter, and sometimes it will be behind. So whoever is operating your camera will be right behind your teleprompter lens. But other than that, they are all the same. Your words will be reflected into the glass of the teleprompter. Now, the second kind of teleprompter is what we call the presidential teleprompter. And if you get to use one of these kind of fancy teleprompters, then you've probably made it big time, because these are pretty amazing. If you've ever seen politicians read to us where it looks like there's no way they can be reading from a teleprompter. They're looking at the people, their eyes aren't darting. There's definitely no doubt that they are just speaking to you. Well, most of the time, as a matter of fact, they are reading off a teleprompter. But this teleprompter is actually a piece of glass that's mounted above the politician or above the speaker. And sometimes they'll have 2 sheets of glass or even 3 that will have the president's or the politician's speech on them. And it's the same on each panel of glass. So that way, when the politician wants to look this way and speak to these people, the teleprompter is there. If they want to speak to the center, the teleprompter is there. And if they want to speak to this side, the teleprompter is there. So these are really modern, really sophisticated teleprompters that just basically look like large sheets of glass that, are almost a 180, so that you can look anywhere and still see your speech. And again, if you are lucky enough to use one of these kind of teleprompters, then really enjoy the experience, because this is few and far between. So last but not least is what we call a floor teleprompter. And oftentimes in the speaking trade, this is called a comfort monitor, because it gives so much comfort to speakers. And these aren't much different from the presidential setup in that there will often be more than one. There'll often be one in the middle of the stage or wherever you're speaking, and then one on either side. And it will be the same script on all 3, but they're there so that the speaker can walk wherever they want and still see their comfort monitor. Now, this can usually be hung at an angle on the floor, but it is definitely on the floor, which makes the speaker look down if they need to see what's on the teleprompter. And if it's a live audience, this is not such a bad thing. The audience knows there's a comfort monitor. If they see the speaker eyes dart down to that monitor, it's not a big deal. If you're doing something like a TED Talk where there's a live audience, but there's also a video recording that will come afterwards, it is really a bad thing to see that speaker's eyes darting down to the floor. The viewers don't know what's going on, and what it ends up looking like is lack of confidence. So if you have a comfort monitor or a floor monitor and there's just a live audience, it's fine. It's much better than holding cue cards or some kind of paper with your words on it. However, if you know that the video is equally as important as the live audience, then practice, practice, practice so that your eyes aren't constantly darting down. Now, no matter what kind of teleprompter you're using, there will be some kind of way of starting it, stopping it, and adjusting the speed. The really high-end models, like the presidential model, will recognize your speech and it will go as you're reading. It will recognize your cadence and it will slow down if you slow down. It will stop if you pause. It will speed up if you speed up. So you don't have to worry about adjusting your pace to the teleprompter. The teleprompter adjusts to you. If you don't have this, every teleprompter will either have a remote control where you get to decide the pace, or somebody operating the teleprompter. And the last video I did on teleprompters, I talked a lot about getting to know your teleprompter operator and how to work with them so that you can speak at a cadence that is natural to you. So check out that video if you want to know more than that. Before we end this video, I'm sure you're thinking, how do I know if I should use a teleprompter or not? Or I've been told that teleprompters are not a good thing. So how do I know which is which? Which should I do? Now, no matter how great your delivery is and how much you have subject matter expertise, there's nothing worse than seeing somebody read off note cards, huge no-no, or forget their third point of 3. So a teleprompter can make sure that you have a safety net if you have to memorize a lot of stuff or your memory lapses. So let's face it, if you are one of those busy executives where you are given communication from your communications department or your marketing department constantly that you have to do in front of a televised audience for, marketing reasons, then this would be a great place to use a teleprompter because it can be your safety net. It can make sure that you don't have to memorize all these different pieces of communication. And this is why newscasters use them. There's sometimes no getting around a teleprompter if you are a keynoter at a large event and the decision is made for you by your event coordinator. And in this case, you would not be able to say, oh, I'm better without a teleprompter. It is just standard operating procedure. And this happens a lot. If you find yourself in a situation where it's standard protocol to use a teleprompter, just make sure that you're preemptive and that you practice so that you come off as being an expert, being confident, and hopefully speaking as if you're not reading. Now, when do you want to throw the teleprompter out the window and say, I'm just going to fly by the seat of my pants? Well, one factor to consider is the impact of teleprompters on your audience. If you know that this is not your strong suit and it is an option, then it's much better to do some rehearsal, memorize your key talking points, and deliver it without a teleprompter, even at the risk of forgetting, because there's nothing worse than having a speaker who we can clearly tell is reading to us because their voice is monotone, because we see their eyes going back and forth. So unless you're really polished on reading from a teleprompter, you want to make sure that you know your material well enough just to speak to the audience. So net, teleprompters are here to stay. And like any product, it's about learning how to use this tool so that you're confident with it when you need to use it and that you are able to use it in a way that is going to make you look like the subject matter expert. And with enough preparation and by just using one of these apps that's out there, you can sound like a broadcast journalist or a pro keynoter yourself. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to give it to a colleague, maybe somebody you know who is in a position trying to decide teleprompter or no teleprompter. And make sure to subscribe to our channel. We have hundreds of videos on everything soup to nuts, from presenting live, on camera, and everything in between. And if you're interested in what we do at Moxie, check out our website, moxieinstitute.com. See you next time.